Let's start with a very important question. What is a sentence? To do well on the SAT, you have to understand what a sentence is and what a sentence is not. Now, I'll give you a very, very straightforward definition here. A sentence consists of three essential elements: a subject, a verb, and a complete thought or action. I'm just going to shorten that to CT. So let me use this sentence as an example. I threw the ball. Not the most creative sentence of all time, but what are you going to do? All right, so what's the subject of this sentence? Who is doing the action? Well, I am. I threw the ball, right? I'm the subject of this sentence. I'm the hero of the story. And what action am I taking? Well, that's the verb. I threw the ball. Okay. What do I mean by a complete thought? Well, if this just said, I threw, in a certain context, that might make sense, but I'm missing information to complete my thought. And realistically, you really just need to be an expert at identifying the subject and the verb, but I want to keep that in there, that a complete thought is necessary for a sentence to be a sentence. Let's try this out with a question. In this example, it's going to be essential that you recognize what's the subject and what's the verb. So pause the video and try this out. All right. Playwright Anna Deavere Smith bases her plays on firsthand accounts of real events from real people. For example, Smith's collection of interviews with hundreds of Angelenos blanked the source material for Twilight Los Angeles 1992. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? All right. First off, a very straightforward question. Are we missing a subject or a verb here? Well, if we look at the answer options, provide, provides, are providing, is providing, those are all action words. Those are verbs, right? So this blank here needs to be a verb. And as we know from sentences, verbs have to have a subject that goes with them. Now, this one's a little tricky because I'm not talking about a simple sentence like I threw a ball. The verb is to provide. Provide, provides, are providing, is providing. So what's the subject? What is providing, or what provides, or what provide, or are providing, right? A lot of people look at this and they say, well, it's the interviews that provide the source material. And interviews is plural, so I need to conjugate that accordingly, right? The interviews provide the source material. The interviews with hundreds of Angelenos provide the source material. But let's zoom out a little bit. Are we talking about the interviews, or are we talking about the collection of interviews? There's one collection of interviews. That's a singular word. And if you don't quite buy this, let me give you a different example. Suppose I'm talking about a bag of cookies. That sounds tasty, right? A bag of cookies. Would you say the bag of cookies is on the table, or the bag of cookies are on the table? You would say is, because there's only one bag of cookies. And here, there's only one collection of interviews. I realize this is a tricky question, but this is what the SAT does all the time. They love to have these kind of complicated subjects. So we're talking about a singular subject, one collection of interviews. So that leads me to say, okay, well, either the collection of interviews provides, right? Not provide. So it's either provides, because it's one collection, or is providing. Has to be one of these two. It's not plural, right? So one collection of interviews provides or is providing. How do I decide between these two? Well, I need to look at the context of the sentence in comparison to the one before it. Playwright Anna Deavere Smith bases. I don't say is basing, right? So I need to keep that consistent. Playwright Anna Deavere Smith bases her plays, and for example, the collection of interviews provides. I need to keep the construction the same. So is providing is not correct. The correct answer here is B, provides. Another important task on the test is being able to identify what the correct verb tense should be. So pause this video and try this question out. The drafters of the United States Constitution had the difficult task of striking a balance between two unappealing forms of government, : None of the framers wanted a return to the absolute authority of a king, semicolon. However, the experience of living under the Articles of Confederation, something, them, that a stronger executive was needed. All right, before we really dive into this and get our hands dirty, I want to talk about the structure and punctuation of this question. We're going to go much more in detail on punctuation later. But for this question, let's look at how it's set up. We talk about the drafters of the Constitution, and we say they're striking a balance, or they had to strike a balance, between two unappealing forms of government, colon. What do you expect is going to come next? Well, we're going to present the two different forms of government. One is in this first one, none of the framers wanted to return to the absolute authority of a king. So that's one form of government. And then the second one is going to come in this second part. However, the experience of living under the Articles of Confederation, blank them, that a stronger executive was needed. And you may have already recognized this when you read it, but the reason I'm making such a big deal of this is if you don't understand everything that's being said, at least you can hang on to the structure, right? At least you can hang on to the way the sentence is built and say, well, I don't understand all the words in here, but I know that this part is the first example of a form of government and this part is the second. So just pointing that out. All right, let's get back to the task at hand. All right, the drafters of the U.S. Constitution had a difficult task of striking a balance between two unappealing forms of government. None of them wanted to return to the absolute authority of a king. However, the experience of living under the Articles of Confederation, something them that a stronger executive was needed. First question, are we talking about the present or the past? Well, you don't even need to be a history buff to know that we're talking about the past here. And I assume that in school, you've probably learned a thing or two about the drafting of the United States Constitution in history class. But look at the other verbs in this sentence, right? They had, past tense, the difficult task of striking a balance. None of them wanted, past tense, a return to the absolute authority. Was needed, right? So all the other verbs are in the past. So clearly we're talking about something that took place in the past tense. And that gets rid of answer option A right then and there. So that's nice. And C as well, right? Is convincing and convince are both present. So we can get those out. Now I have to decide between have convinced and had convinced. Let's try to understand the difference between these two. And I'll give you an easier example. Let's say I show up to, I don't know, class and I say, I have done my homework. I'm saying in the present, right now, I have done my homework in the past. So it's referring to the past, but I'm making that statement in the present. Now, what if instead of that, I said, by the time I got home, I had done my homework. Now, I'm not just talking about the past from the present. I'm talking about the past from the past. So applying that to this, we're talking about the framing of the Constitution, which clearly took place in the past, right? But from that vantage point, we're looking backwards even further, right? These drafters, the people drafting the U.S. Constitution, are looking back to the other forms of government that they had experienced. So that's referring to the past from the past. And that leads us to answer option D, had convinced.